thanks for watching. I'm Andreas. I'm based in Zurich, and on the other side of the ocean there is...
I'm David, and I'm based in Philadelphia. We actually met not in a musical setting, and then Andreas just casually told me, well, I'm a conductor and a pianist, and I said, wow, I mean, that's great. I'm just a fan, you know. So, and that's how this conversation started. What we thought we were going to do today was tell you 3 stories which we think are interesting, and the relationship between them is that these are stories about unusual events or circumstances without which we would not be having some of the greatest masterpieces today. So that's kind of the thread that binds the 3 stories that we're going to tell you about. And shall we start?
Yes, let's start.
Do you guys know what is the most watched piece of classical music on YouTube?
Let me guess. No, of course I know, but I think the normal answer was something of Mozart.
No Bach, no Beethoven, no Mozart. Check it out. It's this one. Vivaldis 4 Seasons, most requested piece of music on YouTube, and probably one of the most recording pieces of music ever. And what's amazing about it is that for over 200 years, nobody heard that piece of music being performed, which is really mind-boggling. And it's an interesting story. So Vivaldi died in 1741. He was a Catholic priest. He died alone, kind of broke, left a bunch of cases of manuscripts, which found themselves in a convoluted way, separated and then reunited, and the monastery near Turin. And then in 1926, so 185 years after he died.
Amazing, no? Amazing, really.
Yeah, and all this time, none of his pieces were published or performed, completely forgotten. So 185 years later, the monastery decided that they wanted to do something with this, cases of stuff, and they brought them to the National Library in Turin for evaluation. And luckily, they reached the hands of a Dr. Bartolomeo Gentili, who was an accomplished musician, and he looked at that and said, shit.
Actually, he deserves also a medal. I mean, think of him not being so knowledgeable and so,
right.
Detective-like instinct. Then,
yeah, which is why we mentioned his name, right?
Yeah. No.
So he figured, well, this is a real treasure, and he wanted the library to own the manuscripts, not sell them. Eventually, they got sold to a nobleman who donated them to the library, but not all of them. Then some other piece was like somewhere else, and then they ended up donating it. All this happened like from 1926 until 1949, where these manuscripts were reunited and cataloged and learned. And the very first performance was not until December 31, 1947, right?
Amazing,
Louis Kaufman performed a portion of the 4 Seasons at Carnegie Hall.
That also seems to be part of the story, that Vivaldi's music, although very, very famous, very much requested during his lifetime, So towards the end of his life, sometime he fell out of fashion, because of course, if you think like 1741, that's already, you know, the transition from Baroque to classic. So then it could easily be that somehow this music, you know, wasn't fashionable anymore. So people stopped playing it, and yeah, that's it. And I mean, also one thing to always remember is, I mean, we today, as you said, as we're discussing, I mean, we talk about music that is, you know, more than 200 years old. And we keep playing such pieces, you know, and even Beethoven is more more than 200 years old, and so all the rest. I mean, but in those days, people, so even the ordinary audience would have been insulted had you played to them 2 times or 3 times the same piece. They always wanted to hear something new. So, I mean, it was completely unthinkable that a composer would present himself in a new concert or at a new location in a new country, wherever, with an old piece. They always had to write something new.
It's remarkable, really, not only the 4 Seasons, but everything else that he did, which is outstanding.
I must say, I'm without bragging, but I mean, I recently conducted a Vivaldi piece, Nisi Dominus, it's called, and it's for alto and string orchestra. And I really thought of our conversations, earlier conversations, and I again discovered how genius, I mean, this music is. It's so simple, it's so clear, and still it's sometimes even almost minimalist, you know, but it's with the least of means, it's the maximum of effect.
Let's move to the next story. Another fantastic composer whose name starts with a V, Giuseppe Verdi. So Giuseppe Verdi, I view the greatest opera composer of all time. He had a tough start, you know, he really did. He was, you know, typical struggling artist. You know, he was rejected by the Milan Conservatory. He had trouble getting commissions, and, you know, he finally found a sponsor who believed in him, who commissioned 3 pieces. Well, so actually he got one commission, which was well received, and then he got, as a result of that, a commission to write 3 operas. And the second opera he started writing was a comic opera called King for a Day. And what happened during the time he was writing it was devastating. He had 2 young children, each of whom died in sequential years at age 2. And then his wife died shortly thereafter at age 26. And so his entire family was devastated, was gone in this span of 2 years while he was writing this comic opera. And so, not surprisingly, the opera was terrible.
It was a complete fiasco. I read it up. I mean, and although the cast, you know, apparently the cast was exquisite.
And he was devastated from every perspective, and did not want to write music anymore. And so the next piece, this impresario, you know, Bartolomeo Morelli, he kept believing in him, he kept chasing him to write another opera, and he had this libretto for an opera called Nabucco, which he kept throwing at him, and Verdi didn't want to have anything to do with it, and, you know, he would just, like, you know, put it in the trash, and Morelli would pressure him again, and, you know, and finally one day, you know, he decided, well, maybe we'll give it a shot, and so what came out of that is an opera that changed history, mostly because in it there is a magnificent choir piece called Va Pensiero. this piece of music, other than being sublime and the words being profound, touched the nerve in Italy, because it talked about these were Hebrew slaves in Babylon who longed to be free. And at the time, Italy was ruled by the Austrians, and there was a strong undercurrent of independence in Italy trying to get rid of the Austrians. And somehow this music captured the hearts of the Italians. And they would come out of the opera humming the piece. And it became kind of the unofficial national anthem of Italy. And Verdi
the independent song, so to say.
Independent song, that's right. The Marseillaise of...
Yeah, definitely. Something, and again, that's what I mentioned before, there you can see in a nutshell what this Italian clarity means. I mean, if without being, simple in any way, it's highly sophisticated music, and at the same time, everybody can sing it after listening to it just once. And that's the miracle, because it's certainly, that's something also I learned from many composers. I mean, the melodies you hear, and if they sound simple, never assume that composing them was as simple as they sound. So, but that's the genius, to condense one's, imagination being a composer into such a melody that is just perfect and understandable immediately.
We had Gentili in the first story. We have
Merelli
in the second story, which without him, basically, we wouldn't be having some of the greatest operas ever written. So here's Gentili and Morelli. And now the third story also has a hero.
This other composer we are going to discuss a little bit is Sergey Rachmaninov, the famous Russian composer, or let's say of Russian origin and then later exiled. And by the way, some essential element also in his life and in his music is a constant homesickness. I mean, he was always, since being exiled from Russia, he was always homesick. And he tried always to create around him like the closest he could get to of a Russian, environment. He had Russian, servants, Russian cooks. And anyway, but he was, as you know, he was not only then later on a very famous composer, but he also was in the first place a very accomplished pianist. He was really also, in today's standards, he would be in the international top, maybe even top 5. He was so accomplished, and
he had an advantage that other people didn't. He had humongous hands.
Huge hands, huge.
And so he would span, and famous pianists today, they comment how difficult it is to play. Their hands are not big enough. It's Ashkenazi used to say, I wish I had 10 more centimeters.
No, it's amazing. I mean, of course, it's possible to play his music even with not so large hands, but it's much more, you need much more effort to make sound it effortlessly, because if that's the point, if you have huge hands, you just lay them on the keys, and then you have already like 10 voice chords, and otherwise you have like to stretch your fingers all the time, and it's, first of all, it's dangerous if you're not trained, and second of all, it's much more demanding to sound as effortlessly as it should sound. But anyway, he at one point composed his first symphony, and again, like the Verdi opera, it was a complete fiasco. I didn't find anything about the quality of the performance, but I suppose it must have been normal, at least average.
Well, actually, it was not. It was not.
It was a good performance or not?
It was a terrible performance.
It was a terrible performance
Yeah,
also.
it was
okay.
a terrible, and you know why? The conductor was none other than Glazunov.
And he didn't like
Glazunov. And Glazunov was drunk out of his mind when he was conducting it. He was smashed. And so the performance was a disaster. In no small measure, thanks to Glazunov, by the way, is a great composer. That was
bad performance. Also, the critics didn't like the music, and same effect like with Verdi. Rachmaninoff wasn't able to write music, his own music, for another 3 or 4 years. So he said, no, I'll stop. He continued to perform as a pianist, but he stopped writing music. And then he met, and again, this is also similar to Merelli probably. So he found a family who liked him very much, and he liked his family. And the daughter of this family, by the way, later became his wife. And they decided, you know, this guy is so talented, it can't be that he never will write music again. And they sent him to a psychotherapist named Dr. Nikolai Dahl. And, you know, at that time, it wasn't yet, you know, we hadn't Freud yet. So there was not this, special new therapy. But in those days, they just did hypnosis. So Rachmaninoff went to a few hypnosis sessions with Dr. Dahl, and apparently very successful, because then he started writing music again, and what came out was this world famous second piano concerto. And on the front page of the score, he dedicated the piece to Dr. Nikolai Dahl. That's probably also one reason why we know where Dr. Dahl was and what his effect on Rachmaninoff was.
Yeah, he certainly didn't hide it. So yeah, and the second piano concerto is one of the most beloved pieces of music ever written. And I may brag, was first recorded by the Philadelphia Orchestra.
You're right, by Stokowski, and
recorded it with Rachmaninoff on the piano.
Rachmaninoff himself.
Well, hopefully you enjoy the stories and you understand why without them we wouldn't be having some of the greatest music. And you have 3 unsung heroes, each of whom, you know, most people don't know their names, but made a huge contribution to the history of music.
Okay, tune in again. Bye.